On debate, Senator Deacon, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Your Honour, and thank you, colleagues. I'm glad to get on the scoreboard in the 45th Parliament. In 2018, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg appeared before the United States Senate Committee for a hearing that was meant to address serious concerns about data privacy and digital accountability. One exchange quickly went viral. A senator asked Zuckerberg, and I quote, "If a version of Facebook will always be free, how do you sustain a business model in which users don't pay for your service?" Unquote. Zuckerberg's response? "Senator, we run ads." That response drew both laughter and scrutiny from around the world. That hearing revealed a generational and institutional disconnect between lawmakers and the technologies that are disrupting our societies and economies. A light was shone on the gap between the pace of technological change and the capacity for legislators to meaningfully understand and use technology, let alone manage its risks and capture its opportunities. That kind of disconnect is not just an American phenomenon. It can just as easily happen here, and in some ways, it already has. Legislatively, we're not keeping up with our peers. We may not be able to fully close the generational gap, but we can and must address our institutional readiness to legislate in an age of rapid technological change. That's why I'm introducing this motion. It asks that for the remainder of this session, every Senate committee consider the influences and impacts of technology in a study that it undertakes. Now, colleagues, I'm not suggesting that we all learn how to code, mainly because we don't have to. ChatGPT can now write code on demand on our behalf. My focus is on the fact that regardless of the policy area, our committees need to be equipped to think critically and responsibly about the effects of technology as it relates to the issues that we study and how legislation will shape Canada's integration of and use of technology. Technology is no longer a sector that can be put in a silo or a niche area of expertise. It's a disruptive, cross-cutting force that shapes every corner of society and our economy. Tens of millions of Canadians use the internet or apps countless times per hour of each day, of each month, of each year. Along with the benefits of these services come growing concerns about the security of our digital systems and the data they contain. Our technology is fueling market-creating innovations that can generate or erode wealth and environmental progress. I've celebrated some of these innovations in this chamber and online, from fintechs helping Canadians to build their credit scores to carbon dioxide removal innovators leading the green revolution. Technology is also reshaping how we work, from automation and AI to gig platforms, raising new questions about labor rights and protections and the future of work. Long-standing business models are being completely disrupted and replaced by new businesses that are growing faster than anyone could have ever imagined, a process called creative destruction. In our democracy, technology is influencing public discourse in new ways. The spread of disinformation and AI-generated content challenges the integration of our the integrity, of our democratic processes. Simply put, technology is disrupting the traditional policymaking process and how we consider solutions that are best for Canadians. I think it's fair to say that the pace of digital transformation will continue to accelerate. So I think it's also fair to expect an increase in legislative load in the upcoming Parliament, especially when compared to the previous Parliament. In the 44th Parliament, 3 pieces of government legislation that affected the digital economy in substantial ways achieved royal assent. These were Bill C-11, the Online Streaming Act, Bill C-18, the Online News Act, and Bill C-69, the Digital Services Tax, which was within the Budget Implementation Act 2024. 5 more pieces of legislation were tabled, but they did not make it through to royal assent. Bill S-6, an act respecting regulatory modernization. Bill C-26, a bill relating to critical cybersecurity protections. Bill C-27, the Digital Charter Implementation Act. Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act, and Bill C-65, the Electoral Participation Act. These bills touched on some of the complex, fast-moving issues where legislation and regulations are struggling to keep up. Much more needs to be done, especially if we're to catch up with the digital ambition of becoming a leading innovative economy. If we want a chamber of sober second thought that is prepared for today's world, we must recognize that technology is no longer an optional context for our work. It is the context for our work. We all know that the Senate's strength lies in committee work, where we investigate, review, and improve policies that matter to Canadians. However, today, only the Standing Senate Committee for Social Affairs, Science and Technology has a direct reference to technology in its mandate. That's not to say other committees have not focused on technology, but there is no consistent or formal requirement or role. But I don't think we should silo technology into one or even a few committee responsibilities. Instead, it should be a core consideration in every committee's work. This brings me back to the proposed motion at hand. It asks all committees for the duration of this session to consider the influences and impacts of technology in their work, both in reviewing legislation and in special studies. As you know, the Rules Committee, rather than a single senator, is formally responsible for recommending changes to committee mandates. However, despite several attempts to identify ways to raise the profile of technology in committees, including suggestions of merging science and technology with other existing committees, the Rules Committee has been unable to come to unanimous agreement on this issue. Colleagues, we know the Senate has countless advocates for this issue. That's why I thought it important to propose a sub-step that might help us to move forward while the Rules Committee continues its important work. So if passed, how would this proposed motion, work in practice? I'll offer two suggestions. First, we can build on our existing institutional resources, such as the expertise of the Library of Parliament. Library analysts are already providing senators with expert, nonpartisan support in different aspects of their work, most notably in committee. This motion will enable analysts to consider how a given policy interacts with technology and flag relevant technological trends or risks in committee briefing notes. Library analysts can also support committees by identifying sector-specific or general tech experts as go-to witnesses who can advise committees on technological issues. Just as we hear from economists, legal scholars, or subject matter experts, we should normalize hearing from technologists, innovators, and digital policy experts in our committee deliberations. Doing so will increase our capacity to assess potential risks, opportunities, and unintended consequences of technology or legislation that might otherwise go unnoticed. These suggestions can help senators build confidence in the muscle to apply a tech lens to their scrutiny of policy issues in committee and more broadly. More importantly, doing so would not require any additional Senate resources, as they would be incorporated into the analyst's existing responsibilities. I was thrilled to hear from our new parliamentary librarian, Christine Ivory, that they are already implementing plans to ensure that the Library of Parliament can provide better support to all committees in the Senate and the House when it comes to technology and innovation issues. I fully support her efforts and hope that the library continues to receive the necessary resources and support to equip their staff in meeting parliamentarians' needs in this critical area. Secondly, I think we can champion the development of a technological assessment policy tool similar to Gender-Based Analysis Plus. Just as GBA Plus, language and regional considerations are employed across the board in assessing public policy, we could also champion a technology impact assessment tool that could help us scrutinize how policies intersect with technology. This tool could encourage us to think of pertinent questions like, how does this policy interact with emerging technologies? Does the legislation risk unnecessarily restricting the adoption of new technologies? Who will benefit or be left behind by a technology-driven disruption? What regulatory gaps exist, and what safeguards are needed, if any? How will these technologies shape the issue now or in the next 5 or 10 years from here? How do we ensure that the legislation allows for regulatory agility that will accommodate ongoing technological change? There are examples of impactful policy and assessment tools that we can draw from to achieve this. I already mentioned GBA Plus. Another great example is the Competition Bureau's Pro-Competitive Policy Assessment Toolkit, which evaluates whether a policy is pro or anti-competitive. There's also Treasury Board's Algorithmic Impact Assessment, an AI risk assessment tool that can be adapted for public policy objectives. As legislators championing a similar tool for technology, it would be a crucial step towards enabling forward-looking, consistent technological perspectives across our important work. Honourable Senators, this motion is not about legislating specific technologies or platforms. It's about building our capacity in the Senate to steadily strengthen our ability to scrutinize legislation and policies in this technological era. This motion challenges us to make a simple but meaningful change to one of the most important areas of work as senators, our committees. By systematically applying a technological lens to our scrutiny of legislation and studies in committee, we can expand our skill sets to effectively legislate, investigate, advise on this ubiquitous disruptive force. The stakes are high. If we don't effectively understand the dynamics of technology in our public policy, we risk creating outdated and ineffective laws, miss opportunities for innovation and economic growth, and harbor blind spots in ethics, privacy, equity, and public trust. So the choice before us, I think, is simple. React to technology's impacts or start to shape them. I hope we choose the latter. Thank you, colleagues.